The Last of Us Part 2 will forever go down as one of the best, most successful video games ever made, and one of the most controversial. There's no denying the polarizing effect the game, and more specifically its narrative, has had on the video game community since its release on June 19th, 2020, a polarization that has and will undoubtedly continue for years to come. It's made talking about the game's story incredibly tricky, as anyone who has or has tried quickly learns, with there being two substantial camps on the issue. One that considers it a masterpiece worthy of the greatest game of all time laurels, and one that considers it to be unbearable garbage, the poster child of what they consider to be wrong with video game writing in the last 5 to 10 years. This has put people who land in the middle, people like myself, in a bit of an awkward, if not outright difficult position. Lean too far to one side, and invariably we draw out the torches and pitchforks from the other. However, this isn't going to be the subject of this video. Instead, I want to discuss a particular moment in the story that I feel hasn't gotten enough attention and vitriol from both critics and players. Allow me to give my too long don't care review of the story. The story and narrative of The Last of Us Part 2 is fantastic, one that succeeds far more than it fails, but unfortunately the failures are far more glaring. To call it a work of art in its writing and presentation is a slight understatement, but to call it a runaway masterpiece is to ignore the flaws that permeate it, especially during its biggest moments. Naughty Dog took some immense risks, and while they mostly managed to pull them off, they had the effect of creating the polarization that we continue to see, intended or otherwise. Now, I want to be clear, I've thoroughly enjoyed my time with the game and will happily recommend it to anyone who hasn't played it and is remotely interested. However, it's an experience that was damn near ruined by one part in particular. The ending. But it's not the part you think. With that said, spoiler warning for both The Last of Us Part 1 and 2. There will also be scenes and images that may be disturbing and distressing to some viewers. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. Let's start with as brief a recap as we can possibly get. Part 2 begins 4 years after the end of the last game, when Joel went on a homicidal rampage of a hospital in Salt Lake City to save Ellie, a young girl who's immune to the cordyceps virus that nearly wiped out all of humanity, from getting her brain split open in the hopes of finding a cure that may or may not even be possible to make. Flash forward those 4 years, Joel and Ellie have made themselves a home in Jackson, Wyoming, a town run by Joel's brother Tommy and his wife Maria, trying to live their lives as normally as possible after all they went through in the years prior. This takes a dramatic turn for the worst when Joel is sent to meet God by Abby, a former member of the Fireflies and current member of the Washington Liberation Front, or WLF, and the daughter of the very surgeon that was supposed to crack open Ellie's head 4 years earlier, who Joel killed during his violent rampage. She does this in front of Ellie and Tommy, who both swear bloody vengeance, which results in them both heading towards Seattle in search of her, though Ellie does this initially to look for Tommy, who stormed on ahead, much to Maria's consternation.
Just, do me a favor and bring my dumbass husband home in one piece, please.
Reaching Seattle begins a long series of events over 4 days, where Ellie, along with her girlfriend Dina, take on both the WLF, a fanatical religious group called the Seraphites, and loads of mushroom zombies as they both try to rescue Tommy from his stupidity and cut Abby into tiny little pieces. This culminates in a final showdown with Abby in the theater that they're using as a home base. Jesse, Dina's ex-boyfriend and father to her child, yeah, she's Prego Maego by the way, who followed them there, is killed, and Tommy gets shot in the head, which he somehow survives. During the initial standoff, the story perspective switches to Abby as we see the preceding 4 days from her perspective as she tracks down her ex-boyfriend Owen, then gets caught up in the WLF's failed assault on the Seraphites, all while trying to protect a young Seraphite kid gone AWOL named Lev. Her section also culminates in the standoff with Ellie in the theater, which devolves into a violent game of hide-and-go-seek, where we control Abby.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
Anyways, this fight ends with Ellie on the floor and Abby about to slit Dina's throat, partially to get revenge for Ellie's murder of her friend, the also Prego Maego Mel, before she's stopped by Lev. Abby lets them walk on the condition they never come back. Fast forward several months later, Ellie and Dina are living together on a farm outside Jackson with Dina and Jesse's baby when Tommy comes by to visit. He's managed to locate Abby and Lev somewhere in and around Santa Barbara, California. Dina rightfully wants nothing to do with it, but Ellie, suffering from PTSD and still unable to get over letting Abby slip the net, abandons her and the little one to go after her. Meanwhile, Abby and Lev are captured in Santa Barbara by slavers known as Rattlers, featuring Geralt of Rivia. Did you really think I'd go more than one video without mentioning The Witcher 3? Anyways, Ellie reaches Santa Barbara. Fighting through scores of fungi boys and girls and Rattler fucks, she manages to get inside their compound and even manages to free some slaves who go ham on their captors. Meanwhile, Ellie, more than a little banged up, heads for the beach where she discovers the Rattlers were doing more than keeping and selling slaves. And who does she find? Why, Abby, of course! Cutting her down and waiting for her to rescue Lev, she then follows them to the shore where they find a small boat. And it's at this point that Ellie has an epiphany and remembers that she's supposed to be killing her and demands that they fight, even though Abby wants no part of it. Anyways, they fight, Abby bites two of Ellie's fingers off, and Ellie nearly drowns Abby before stopping herself when she has the vision of Joel. She lets Abby and Lev go while she sits in the water for a time. We then jump forward to the farm back in Wyoming, where Ellie finds that Dina and the baby are gone, probably back to Jackson. After trying to play the guitar Joel gave her with two less fingers, she puts it down and we watch through the window Ellie leave the farm, never to return, bringing the story to a close. So after that brief recap, you may have already started picking out problems with the story here and there. Most of them are obvious and have been commented on more times than J-Lo's had wedding rings and are not without, at minimum, genuine questions and concerns. However, I'd like to remind you that this video is focused squarely on the story's ending. Now, when I say that, you may be thinking I'm talking about the final scene at the farm, when Ellie returns to Wyoming and we have this long drawn-out sequence with her searching the house, playing the guitar, then leaving. I will grant that I too take some umbrage with the scene, more specifically with the final shot. The slow pan to the guitar and window, then watching Ellie leave the farm through said window. I think it takes too long and could have been constructed in a far more interesting way. But this isn't the part of the ending that I take the most umbrage with. Oh no, that honorific belongs to another, not that much earlier. When Ellie finds Abby at the beach. Part 2's biggest themes are revenge and retribution. How these two contribute to perpetuating a cycle of violence that never seems to end, and that no one really comes out of it a winner if and when it's all said and done. We see this with Abby as, after she goes 100 yards with Joel's head, her friends are offed one by vengeful Ellie and Tommy, and we see this with Ellie after she goes off to California, only to return home to find Dina and the baby gone. We even see this in the conflict between the WLF and the Seraphites, as both sides take turns revenge killing one another amidst the overarching war between them. The game absolutely nails these themes in more ways than one, even if at times it can be heavy-handed in its presentation and is worthy of praise. But what does that have to do with this one scene? Let's go back to the recap for a moment. After the events of Seattle, despite settling into a peaceful life, Ellie is plagued by nightmares of her experiences, very clearly suffering from PTSD and unable to let go of the fact that Abby got away. When Tommy comes along with new information regarding Abby's whereabouts, she resolves to walk away from everything, to satisfy her lust for revenge, and to hopefully and finally move on from Joel's death. This walk will take her through yet more mushroom zombies and yet another human group of crazed killers and slavers in the Rattlers, including having a piece of wood stabbed through her side after she's briefly captured by Geralt and some schmuck who gets a rather nasty hickey from a clicker who looks to be straight out of Harewood. She goes through all that and more to find Abby strung up like a grisly trophy, well on her way to the pearly gates should she remain there. And what does Ellie do? Cuts her down and proceeds to help her and Lev to a nearby boat. I cannot begin to describe how much, at this very point in the story, I wanted to throw my controller through the screen. What the fuck is Ellie doing? There are 3 reasons why I despise this scene. The first ties directly to what comes after when we get to the boat. Ellie will begin to start helping Abby before she suddenly remembers why she came all the way to California and demands to fight Abby, putting a knife to Lev's throat when she refuses. As an extended sequence, it is incredibly clunky and awkward and just strange. Everything in terms of tone and agency just seems to switch on a dime. Like literally, it's like someone flipped a switch randomly that compels Ellie to suddenly remember that she's supposed to be killing Abby. It makes the fight between them feel incredibly contrived, and all because of Ellie's decision to cut her down when she didn't even need to, something we'll dig into in a little bit. The second reason, which feeds off of the first, is that it makes Ellie seem incredibly fucking stupid. Now, I must first admit that I'm not a fan of Ellie in Part 2, especially when you compare her to her character in the first game. She's hot-headed, reckless, and occasionally cruel, but I can't accept the counter-argument that some have made that such behavior is often necessary in the world she resides in, where it is often every man or woman for themselves. There's also the argument that all she's experienced and suffered through, the violence, the betrayal, and all the deaths she's bore witness to, be it by her hands or others, has compounded on itself to make her into the person she is in this game, a broken individual in a world where violence often determines survival. They don't change the fact that she's frankly a horrible person in this game, but I can't accept them as reasonable explanations. After all, it would be unfair to judge her so without at least exploring all those elements in close detail. What can't be argued is her intelligence. Say what you will about her personality, there's no denying she maintains a sharp intellect. Most of the time. She's ever resourceful out in the field and shows moments of understanding where violence, or rather the direct application of violence, isn't always necessary to get where she needs to go or get what she needs, even if this is often turned on her. She's also incredibly driven, and while this often leads or lends to her recklessness, it's a trait that I think under the given circumstances is more admirable than not. She has a goal and will do anything to achieve it. Which makes her cutting down Abby seem extremely out of character and makes her out to be an idiot. It's like she suddenly forgets that she came all the way out to California to kill Abby. Some have argued that perhaps Ellie shows a pang of compassion, hence helping Abby and Lev get to the boat, but then we circle back to the ridiculousness of the sudden shift when she decides that she wants to fight her, like, oh right, I'm supposed to be killing this bitch, not saving her, yada yada yada. It really spoils Ellie as a character, as well as the journey she's been on the entire game, and, for me, fails in its messaging. Because what the fuck is it trying to say? That it's so easy to forget about hatred, revenge, and retribution even if only for a minute or two? I don't know about that, buddy. I've had people within my own family that have held on to deep-seated hatred for others their entire lives. Hell, I'm guilty as charged for holding on to grievances for far too long. Such feelings take time, maybe even years, to ebb away. They don't just dissipate in a matter of seconds. Ellie has been holding on to hers for quite some time, which makes this sudden decision to cut Abby down seem illogical by those standards, and made even worse by a desire to fight Abby to the death right afterwards. If this is in fact a means of showing Ellie having an ounce of sympathy and compassion as previously mentioned, then it, coupled with the subsequent fight at the boat, is handled incredibly poorly, and really diminishes Ellie's character. The third and final reason I hate this scene, and consider it to be the story's biggest flaw, is the missed opportunity presented. As previously discussed, the main themes of this story are revenge and retribution. Neil Druckmann, in an interview with GQ magazine, stated that he was inspired by his upbringing in Israel, more specifically the Ramallah lynching in 2000 during the Second Intifada. Say what you will about Druckmann and his directorship, writing, and politics. There are plenty of other videos that do a far better job of explaining them than I ever could, but there's no denying that, along with Hallie Gross, the two serving as co-writers for the game, that they hit those themes squarely on the head. To go along with those themes is the idea of the futility of revenge and the violence it perpetuates, how inevitably there are no winners, only varying degrees of loss and suffering. How this scene fits into that equation is that it would have been an absolutely perfect moment to really hammer home the idea of that futility. Think about it. Ellie has abandoned all that she knows, committing herself to her own personal bloody crusade of taking down Abby no matter the costs. We don't see her journey from Wyoming to Santa Barbara, but given what we know about this world, it can't have come without a consistent application of lethal force. Yet more costs are paid as she crosses Santa Barbara and faces down yet more mushroom zombies and slaving rattlers, and a tree. No doubt in her mind she has to succeed. She suffered too much, given up too much to fail now. Only to find that the rattlers have gotten to Abby already. Someone else got to her first and strung her up like a trophy. This right here would have been the most perfect opportunity to truly hammer down the idea of the futility of revenge. It wouldn't need to be anything dramatic, no resounding musical score, no thought-provoking monologue. All it would need is for Ellie to turn and walk away. realizing at that moment that her entire crusade for revenge was a fruitless, wasted effort. Ellie couldn't have known, of course, up until this moment, but the point remains. She gave up everything for nothing. And it's a golden opportunity of thought-provoking storytelling that seemingly flew over the heads of the writers at Naughty Dog. It's honestly shocking that such a glorious opportunity passed them by, to the point that it almost makes me sick thinking about it, because I feel it would carry 1,000 times more emotional weight than what we get. I also think it would satisfy the multitudes of players who really wanted to see Abby suffer for what she did to Joel. It may not be the same as actually taking her vengeance out on her, but it would satisfy both sides. The side of the writers who wanted to send a message, and the side of the players that wanted to see Abby dead. Not that much would have to change either. All that would be needed is to cut out the ridiculous fight at the boat. The ending at the farmhouse would remain more or less the same, while Ellie would keep the 2 fingers she loses in that fight. Partially, I think the reason Naughty Dog went the route it did was because they wanted that final showdown to happen. If they saw the opportunity, they must have thought it would have been too anticlimactic, but I feel it would have only enhanced the messaging. That sometimes there's no resounding climax to revenge. Sometimes it just ends with a whimper, further adding to the idea of it being a fruitless, wasted effort, that there's no winning to be found in it. By wanting the final showdown, we lead to all of the problems we just discussed. The awkwardness of it all, how it makes Ellie look like an idiot, and in so doing wastes a golden chance to really hammer the point home in a more poignant fashion than what we get. Especially when you consider how it ends with Ellie just letting Abby go when she's at the final moment of triumph because of a random vision of Joel on the front stoop plucking strings. A vision that for me feels incredibly forced and not as impactful as intended due to everything that transpires leading up to it. Both players who wanted Abby dead and the writers who wanted to send an impactful message could have had their cake and eat it too. Instead, the writers attempted to dive headfirst into the cake, but instead landed face first into the table, missing the cake entirely. The story and narrative of The Last of Us Part 2 is a phenomenal experience, without a doubt. Yes, it's not without varying degrees of criticism, but there's a reason that it's still regarded as one of the best of the last decade, further cementing Naughty Dog as one of the finest developers in video games. It's a story that I'm glad that I experienced, and one I may choose to engage with again in the future, but it's an experience that was nearly ruined due to one singular decision the writers made. With that said, allow me to end this video on a particular note. If there's one thing I've learned over the few years I've had this channel and I've been analyzing video game stories and narratives, it's that video game writing is incredibly difficult, doubly so for sequels. You don't just have game mechanics to consider, but also the weight of expectation by players, especially those who are die-hard fans, not just the series in question, but of the developer itself. Success in this industry is both a blessing and a curse. No one goes out of their way to write a bad story, no matter the medium, and that includes specific moments in a given story. For that reason, I try my utmost to interpret developer intentions while simultaneously trying to give them the benefit of the doubt. Sometimes. That said, sometimes when something is baffling, I feel obligated to call it out. That also said, though my cadence may suggest otherwise, I hope that those of you watching my videos may learn something from them so that similar pitfalls may be avoided in future stories. Hey, maybe a Naughty Dog employee is watching this right now and hopefully taking some notes. Who am I kidding? None of them will ever watch this.